David's story begins far from thrones, crowns, and battlefields. It begins in the quiet hills of Bethlehem, where a young shepherd watched over flocks under the wide Judean sky. His world was simple: stone pastures, the sound of sheep, and nights filled with songs he whispered to God. David was the youngest of 8 brothers, overlooked by most and considered ordinary by nearly everyone. Yet destiny often hides itself in the places the world ignores, and God often chooses those whom others dismiss. While his brothers trained for war and served in the armies of Israel, David learned courage in the solitude of the fields. He protected his sheep from lions and bears, relying not on strength, but on faith. His hands grew skilled with the sling because he practiced alone, not for glory, but out of responsibility. In the stillness, his heart learned trust. In the wilderness, he learned to hear the whisper of God. And it would be this quiet strength that prepared him for the moment when the world would finally take notice. One day, the prophet Samuel arrived in Bethlehem with a mission from God: to anoint a new king. Israel had a king already, Saul, but Saul's heart had turned from obedience, and God had chosen another to rise in his place. Jesse, David's father, presented 7 strong sons before the prophet, each one appearing fit for royalty. But God reminded Samuel of a truth humans often forget: man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. One by one, the brothers passed before Samuel, and one by one, God said no. Confusion settled over Jesse's face, and Samuel finally asked, "Are these all your sons?" Jesse reluctantly mentioned the youngest, David, who was still in the fields tending sheep. No one expected much from him. Yet when David entered, dusty from the pasture and carrying the scent of open hills, God spoke clearly to Samuel. This is the one. And in front of his bewildered family, David was anointed, the oil flowing over his hair, marking him for a destiny far greater than he understood. The shepherd boy was chosen for a crown, yet he returned to his sheep, quietly carrying the weight of a calling known only to God. But destiny never stays hidden for long. Beyond the hills of Bethlehem, Israel trembled before a giant named Goliath, warrior of the Philistines, towering, armored, undefeated. For 40 days he mocked the armies of Israel, challenging any man to face him, yet none dared to step forward. Even King Saul felt fear's heavy grip. The entire nation was paralyzed. And then came David, bringing food to his brothers, unaware that he was stepping onto the stage of history. When he heard Goliath's words, David felt something that others had forgotten: faith. He saw not the size of the giant, but the greatness of God. While others measured the threat, David measured the promise. He volunteered to fight, not with armor or sword, but with a sling, a few smooth stones, and a heart anchored in courage. Saul questioned David's ability, reminding him that Goliath had been a warrior since youth. But David remembered the lion, the bear, and the countless nights when God had strengthened his hands in the wilderness. "The Lord who delivered me then," he said, "will deliver me now." With those words, the shepherd stepped into the valley, facing a giant the entire nation feared. Goliath laughed when he saw David, small, unarmored, appearing unprepared. But David had not come to fight for human recognition. He had come to reveal the power of God. As the giant advanced, David ran toward him, reaching into his pouch for a single smooth stone. With practiced precision, he released it from his sling. The stone cut through the air, guided not by David's skill alone but by divine purpose. It struck Goliath's forehead, and the giant collapsed to the earth. In an instant, fear broke, courage rose, and Israel reclaimed hope. David's victory marked the beginning of his rise, but the journey to the throne was not immediate. Saul's jealousy grew as the people celebrated David. Songs echoed through the land. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. The praise that lifted David in the eyes of the nation stirred hatred in the heart of the king. Saul's insecurity turned to rage, and David became a hunted man, running through deserts, caves, and wilderness trails. Yet even then, David refused to harm Saul. Though he was chosen to be king, he would not seize the throne through violence. He waited for God to fulfill his promise in his time. Years passed before David finally took the throne. First over Judah, then over all Israel. The shepherd boy became a warrior, a poet, and a leader. He brought the ark of God to Jerusalem, danced before the Lord with unrestrained joy, and wrote psalms that would echo through centuries, offering comfort to the broken and praise to the faithful. David's life was not without failure. His mistakes were real and costly, but his heart remained turned toward God. He repented deeply, worshipped passionately, and trusted completely. David's legacy is not defined by the crown he wore, the battles he won, or the kingdom he ruled. It is defined by the posture of his heart, a heart that chased after God through triumph and failure, joy and sorrow. From shepherd fields to palace halls, David's story reminds us that God sees potential where others see insignificance, and he calls ordinary people into extraordinary destiny. The world may measure greatness by strength or status, but God measures it by faithfulness. And in David, God found a heart willing to believe, to trust, and to follow. A shepherd who became a king, not by ambition, but by the hand of the one who writes destinies beyond human imagination.